There's a video that was released about Final Fantasy versus WoW, and it actually covers a lot of the things that I wanted to cover in the games. It was something that I really wanted to do at some point as well. I felt like he sort of didn't talk about everything I would have wanted to hear about. It was posted on the Final Fantasy 14 subreddit, and basically Jesse Cox did a just like a video talking about the differences, and it just kind of goes through it all. It's a pretty good video, but I will say after watching it once, there were a couple of things that I kind of disagreed on. I've been following a little bit of Jesse Cox's journey into the game. He hasn't really quite seen what endgame is like. So in my opinion, some of the places that I felt like Jesse Cox kind of missed the mark on or didn't elaborate enough on is on endgame rating. You know, like if you guys don't know who Jesse Cox is, he's this guy who is like an OG WoW guy. Like he's been around forever in the MMO scene, especially WoW. And recently, he just got into Final Fantasy. And as far as I'm aware, he came around on the game because I think initially he didn't like it too much. But, so yeah, anyways, he took a long time to make this video, and he talks about the differences. And I felt like he touched on a lot of the big things, right? Like, he touched on how Final Fantasy is primarily a story-driven game, and I think that's awesome. But the thing is that, like, coming from the rating base, I guess, of this game, Final Fantasy, I feel like so often the raid scene for Final Fantasy just never gets talked about. I don't really understand why that is, but like with the recent Twitch promotion of Final Fantasy, like a lot of raider streamers weren't featured in that, and like when people and even in advertisements when they advertise Final Fantasy, I feel like they don't talk a lot about the raiding scene, and I feel like it's such a shame because I think the raid scene is so damn good. And so that's just my personal wish out of this video is like I wish they touched on the rating a little bit.
Housing, transmog, gambling. What is this, Twitch? What the fuck? This is a joke. Like where's the raids? Where's like the dragon? There's this dragon to kill, and then there's the bigger dragon after that, and then there's an even bigger dragon after you kill the big dragon. It's like, yes. What is this?
For people who like a more competitive experience, I feel like the raid scene in Final Fantasy 14 is actually amazing and like something I wish that got talked about more. Yeah, actually, you nailed it, GTT Grave. You know, and Jesse talks a little bit about it too, which is like, Final Fantasy raids are highly scripted, right? Like everything happens on the same beat, and so people like to call it a dance because you go from one spot when you are required to, and then you move to the next part, and you move to the next place, you know, and you stand there, and it's static. And however, that isn't actually a negative, I think, with Final Fantasy, because I think because of how Final Fantasy is and because that it's scripted, I think they can do a lot more kind of like wild mechanics that require a lot more coordination among your team. Like, so if I was to compare, say, like Final Fantasy Savage raids to, let's say, Castle Nathria, right? Castle Nathria, like there is bits of coordination built into like WoW raids. You know, like when you're at Sludge Fist, for example, you have to coordinate who you're chained up with and move together. And you know, there's little bits of participation also with like the Huntress. Like when you're stunning the dogs, like you need everybody to kind of be on the same page about how to stun things, and you're coordinating. However, it's kind of like done in like this kind of macro sense where as long as everybody as a giant blob is kind of doing the right thing, you can kind of get it clear. In Final Fantasy, because of the raids are only 8 people, there's a lot more individual required mechanics that you have to complete, and it's on you. And like I know in like upper rating in WoW, the individual is like is also very important. But yeah, I guess in Castle Nathria, there's literally a council dance, which is funny. But so I think just in a like top down level, that's like where the big differences are. Is like how scripted the fights are, how damage comes out, and how much individual agency / importance there is on a person's actions, right? So like that's like the big differences overall. Now, I think one of the cool things about Final Fantasy is that within that space of just like having to do these things correctly at the right time, I feel like there's also a lot of room for like creative decisions on how you want to actually tackle the fight, which is also really cool. Although obviously people find out the best way to do things, but like there are little nuances that you learn as you try to parse higher and higher about how you do it. But I guess one of the big things for Final Fantasy is just that mechanically speaking, I just haven't really seen any other game put these kind of mechanics together in a way that, like, when I learn fights in Final Fantasy, it feels like art, like I feel like WoW, each individual boss have like a very core mechanic, and they push that mechanic. I guess that's not too dissimilar to Final Fantasy in a way, but like the Final Fantasy mechanics I feel like are a step beyond anything I've done. Like I've rated in a couple of different MMOs, WoW. I did Dungeons and Dragons Online, if anyone's played that game. I've rated in those. I also used to do the PvP raids in this old ass game called RF Online and whatever. But like, I think Final Fantasy, the mechanics are so unique, and they can be kind of overwhelming because there's a lot thrown at you. And I think that's one of the cool things about Final Fantasy is that, like, if you're looking for difficult, highly mechanical raids, like this is the game. I think it's crazy for that. Nobody talks about how balanced between class and jobs are. Yeah, I agree. I think the different jobs in Final Fantasy is actually incredibly close, and like I guess when I talk about WoW versus Final Fantasy, I talk a lot about my frustrations as well, because it's like I loved WoW, like I love playing WoW, but there are a couple of things that like really bug me, and that's one of the other things that kind of push me to Final Fantasy, because there are things that Final Fantasy does that WoW kind of, I think, struggles with. And so one of the things is class balance. So let's say you really love your class. Let's say you're a Frost Mage. I have a friend who is a Frost Mage main, and he loves Frost Mages, and all he wants to do is play Frost Mage. Well, if you play WoW, if you guys have played Shadowlands, you'll know that Frost Mage is kind of a meme spec. It's not good, and it's not. And it sucks because your damage is like gapped by some of the better things, like balanced druid by like, I mean, sometimes it feels like they do 50% more damage than you, you know what I mean? And it sucks because you're like, well, I love this class, but you're telling me my class is so unviable that the entire community is like out against you, and they will not allow you in their parties, and they're just they don't want you there because you're literally like hampering their ability to do the content, and that sucks. I think that's such a shitty place to be. And so like when I played WoW, I was like, I loved I almost called it Dark Knight. I played Unholy DK, right? And I was happy because Unholy DK was super good, so I was super happy. But when it came to like to gearing up and whatever, that was awesome. But then you'd have these fights that like people actually don't really want melees, and then it just feels bad. Like, and a lot of Castle Nathria was like not very kind to melees, right? And so it was just one of those things where I was like, okay, well, I guess I should play a ranged character so that way people want me more. And then if you want a new class, then you have to start all over, level a new alt, and like do the whole gear treadmill again. And I was like, my item level in WoW 2 was like 220 or something, like I was a pretty decently geared Death Knight, and I would still find it hard sometimes to get into these parties because like people just only wanted a certain number of melee things, right? So like sometimes the design of the raids themselves don't allow you to have as much fun, or just you do less damage, or there's like a number of reasons why your class can be unviable and people don't want you. And then it just sucks. And the only thing you can do is just, well, I guess I re-level a thing and then have to try to fall in love with a new thing. What's nice about Final Fantasy is like you can just play whatever you feel like because it doesn't really fucking matter, right? Like sure, ranged DPS like dancers do a less personal damage, but people still want them, and they design around that, and so it's better to see that like, well, in this game you can kind of be anything, and if you feel like dabbling, it's kind of up to you. And I like that a lot as somebody who values their time. Another thing that bothered me about WoW when I was gearing up my DK was that, well, if I wanted to get better gear so that I could do harder and harder things in WoW, because like I did normal Nathria pretty early on, and I was like, okay, that's great, but I want to do heroic and I want to do mythic, and it's like you need good gear. And how do you get good gear? It's like, well, you either do the gear treadmill of mythic pluses, which honestly is one of the most soul-sucking things ever, because one piece of gear drops and it might not even go to you, and it might not even be your best in slot, right? And so like you can go and do that over and over again, or you can try PvP. And PvP actually, when Shadowlands first came out, was like one of the better ways to get gear quickly. But I'm playing Unholy DK. Are you kidding me? Yeah, again, this comes back down to class balance, but I can't PvP against a Ret Pally or a Sub Rogue, or oh my god, when hunters were just fucking everybody up from stealth and one-shotting you. Like, I was never gonna. There's no way I could have gone to Gladiator and try to get like I don't know, 220 gear right off the bat from PvP. So it sucked. It sucked, right? And so I felt like I felt like my pathways to getting gear and all this stuff was constantly being hampered by dev decisions, and it felt like the whole time I was just stuck with my shitty class that I wanted to play, but like technically kind of did a lot of damage, but like I felt constantly hampered by the devs, right? It wasn't about me, it was about the devs, and I felt that friction all the time when I played WoW. In Final Fantasy, it's like, well, gear is just to make things actually easier. It's like the gear philosophy is so different in this game, where like you can clear the current set of Savage with 510 gear, crafted gear that you can just buy on the market board, and you can do it. It's hard, but you can do it. And I think that was one of the things that I really liked about Final Fantasy 2. It's just like you can just go in and start raiding, and you know, as you get gear, like you can but it's not like you can't do the content before the gear is out. And I think that was one of the things with WoW that kind of frustrated me too. I feel like my Static Mate has a story every other day of healers that strictly cure 1 or 2 DPS. Yeah, so the thing is that like I think there's like a cultural problem in Final Fantasy's community in general about raiding and about like optimization. It's like one of the things that like people hate to hear, and because so much of the advertisement of Final Fantasy XIV is not around its rating and not about its hardcore community. It's always about like, yeah, you can craft, you can glam, you can have housing if you somehow manage to find housing. You know, like they talk a lot about like these other things, and it's disappointing to me, I guess, because I feel like it engenders this sort of community of people who never want to tackle harder stuff in Final Fantasy, which is a goddamn shame because it's so good in this game. I think, Party Taylor, this is a terrific time to start playing Final Fantasy XIV because there's a lot of new players coming in. And on top of that, if I was just to say it generically, I don't think there's a bad time to ever get into Final Fantasy, because the truth is that no matter what, and Jesse Cox talks about this in his video again, is that like no matter what, when you start playing Final Fantasy, you are going to have to play through the story, the MSQ, and so there is no bad time to play Final Fantasy XIV. I don't know, is there a bad time to play Breath of the Wild? The only thing that again, just to reiterate again, the only thing that I think sucks a little bit about Jesse Cox's video is that he really didn't get to the MMO section of the game, which is a shame because I think that part of the game is really good. Another good reason why it's a good time to play right now is because for a lot of people like me who have already cleared the tier and whatnot, and we're just waiting for the next expansion, like we're bored. And honestly, I'd be super happy to take you guys through the game and do dungeons with you guys, teach you how to do raids, get you all set up so by the time Endwalker comes out, you guys will be ace, you know? Like, that's my goal. So, like, when cross-DC raiding happens, like, I want to teach all of you guys how to do all the Savages, you know? So, like, I think that's my plan until Endwalker comes out, is, like, I want to continually get people to raid, and like my whole thing with Final Fantasy XIV is like I wish more people would raid, kill Gargalon together. Dude, okay, so let me show you guys. So this is the last fight of the current Savage tier. So think of it as like this is your Sire Denathrius, and this fight's a doozy. This one's really hard. Let me show you guys what endgame raiding looks like a little bit. My class is sort of a support DPS, so you'll see me tethered to other DPS to boost their damage. This is a raid wine that goes out. Our Astrologians put their healing field down a little. You see that like little glowy circle thing? A little off to the side so our summoner didn't get healed. So see these big old giant crystals? Depending on which is tethered to, it's going to be something different. So this one's tethered to Shiva. So it means that after this mechanic, we have to spread out. Oh, please. And now this is going to be outside and inner cards. I play with a controller, yes. Super well. Okay, now it's going to be the first major mechanic of the fight, Junction Shiva. And so this is where like being pre-coordinated is really important because we're going to spread into different spots and according to groups based off our initial positions that we laid out in front of us before. And then we're going to slide out so that way our little mini AoEs don't hit anybody. Why did that guy do that? I'm not sure. And so now we each have these tethers, which we have to go across. There's another knockback indicator, so you have to use your anti-knockback. And so you want to be far enough away from your thing so that they turn purple, which means that you're far enough away from your icicle so that you guys keeping up? You guys keeping up? This is a lot, right? That's what I'm saying is that this game is fucking sick because the raids are crazy. It's like a thrill, you know? Like, I feel like I'm an adrenaline junkie and this game gives me the hit that I need. Okay, so the next major mechanic is Titan. And this is a extremely damaging AoE. So everyone needs to be, look at that. Look how much damage that was. Now, based off of which color thing that you, color symbol that you get, you're gonna go to different spots. This is also like predetermined for people, so you have to learn where you need to go. So I was orange, so I paired up there. I'm orange again, so I will go back to the same spot I was before. Okay, so I'm going to be fourth to get lasered, so everyone's going to be tethered to something, a statue, and depending on where you statue, you have to move there for the laser. So now it's 2, 3, now 4, and now we're going to get knocked back here. So a lot of the mechanics that you see too is that like if someone's dead for it, your entire group will die. So somebody wasn't in the right place, and so we all die. But tell me that like this raid is sick, right? Like for anyone who doesn't know anything about Final Fantasy raids, like this is crazy, right? Like, am I wrong in saying that like this game mechanically from a raid perspective is like pretty nuts? Like I think it's awesome, and like coming from WoW, this is like so fucking cool. In my opinion, I think the raids in Final Fantasy do not get enough love at all. It's so awesome, and like the feeling that you get from finally clearing a tier is it's crazy.